doesn't, oh, just bear with me 1 second.
I started it.
Okay, great. So let's go ahead and get started. I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and welcome to ACRL Digital Badges Interest Group discussion. Before we get started, I just want to talk a little bit about the Digital Badges Interest Group. We provide a forum for discussion and the exchange of ideas related to digital badges, particularly as they relate to all types of library and information literacy instruction. The interest group's work includes developing new ideas and approaches, approaches to using digital badges, sharing information about digital projects, research on platforms, and providing network opportunities for our members. I'm the current convener for the Digital Badges Interest Group, and we're joined today by our incoming convener, Emily Rimland, and our past convener, Cynthia Ippoliti. We had a great discussion this past August titled Moving Towards Best Practices for Digital Badges, and we wanted to continue that type of conversation. Our discussion today is titled Thinking Critically About Badges, and our speakers are Emily Ford, who is the Urban and Public Affairs Librarian, Scholarly Communication Coordinator, and Assistant Professor at Portland State University Library. Teaching is her favorite thing about her job, and she's lucky to work with students of all stripes. On her non-working days, she can be found in forests around the Pacific Northwest. She recently published To Badge or Not Badge, From Yes to Never Again in the January issue of College and Research Libraries News. Joining us as well is Tori Race. She's the online learning librarian from Penn State and has a PhD in Learning, Design, and Technology from Penn State University. Her library work involves creating instruction, services, and resources for the World Campus students. A primary way this is accomplished is through the library's digital badges. She researches and presents on microcredentials, digital badges, user design, and system thinking. The way we have today's presentation structured is Emily Ford will start by giving about a 15-minute presentation, at which time we're going to have a question and answer session for about 5 minutes. Then Tori is going to come in and speak for about 15 minutes, and again we'll have another 5-minute session for questions and answers. Because we enjoyed and appreciated the great conversation we had at our August meeting, we're leaving the last 10 or 15 minutes for a general conversation as well. So I want to welcome both Emily and Tori, and we'll go ahead and we'll get started with Emily's presentation as I now pass her the controls.
Thank you, Michael. Hi, everybody. I'm really excited to be here, and I appreciate the invitation from both Emily and Michael, and I'm very excited to learn from Tori today as well. So as we get started, before I jump into my slides, Lois is going to help me with a few poll questions so that we all know each other's experience with badges and how we can draw from that. So Lois, if you would be so kind as to start the poll.
All right, the first poll is started and tabulation is in progress.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
While we're waiting, Lois, please interrupt at any time when you have those results. I'm going to move on to my next slide, and then we can kind of bounce back if that's okay. Oh, there are results. So I see that only a small percentage of you have used badges in embedded instruction, and the largest percent have not. Could we move on to the next question? All right, well, that data is gathering, then I'll move on. Lois, did you have something to say?
No, I was just letting you know that poll 2 is open.
Thank you. So while everyone's taking the poll, this second slide, I think we all know, or I want to reinforce, that badges are a visual representation of a skill, achievement, disposition, or knowledge gained. Badging is about instructional design, and I wanted to take a few minutes to talk about what we did at Portland State. Badges for us were the final layer on top of redesigning the curriculum in 3 public health courses that utilize badges for information literacy skills and concepts. For us, we did the instructional design, and that was the meat of our work, and the badges were the fancy, sexy thing that were layered on top of the project. The badges were also the thing that allowed us the funding to do the project in the first place. So I see from our next poll results that have been posted, the majority of us have not used badges in for-credit instruction either. And only a very small percentage of us have used badges in for-credit instruction. Thank you. There's one more polling question. This is going to be the interesting one. And I see the poll is up. So to get back to badges at Portland State, because of the article or the opinion piece that I wrote, I had a colleague ask me how I felt about the work that I had done on instructional design, and I think I should mention that I stand by the instructional design that we did together as a team. I separate badges out from that. My thinking about badges is actually the technical tool. So we might also all know, since we're here with the Digital Badges Interest Group, what badges are lauded, right? What can they do? I think in a badging paradigm, competencies become number 1. I see that we have our results back from our experiences with badges. And this is really interesting to me. I see that a larger minority has had a positive result experience with badges. A minority has had a negative result. A large minority has had neither positive or negative, and there are a lot of us who don't have any experience with badges. Okay, thank you. I just thought that would get us all on the same page. That's all for our poll questions. Thank you, Lois, for running that in the background. So badges are lauded for being able to have competencies kind of raised to the top and really make them salient both to students and to instructors. Badges are also seen as a way to motivate students, although the literature isn't clear as to whether that's only for students motivated extrinsically or intrinsically. And there's some debate about that and some questions about whether this kind of micro-credentialing could be demotivating for some students. And then third, I think badging can allow, in the instructional design behind badging, can allow active learning, which for the constructivists out there is a very positive thing. So I want to continue and kind of talk about just what we heard from students in the project that we ran at Portland State. We had a pre-survey and post-survey prior to our experiment with badges in 3 courses, and I have some quotes here from the post-survey. This particular quote didn't see that badges added any value to their education. It was just a thing kind of laying there that for them didn't really seem to have a point. And I think in this viewpoint from the student, we're seeing that the student is in school and really just wants to get the grade. I have another student viewpoint for you from our post-survey. I think this particular quote points directly to students at Portland State University. And I think that's one of the things that came up for me in the project I did with my colleagues, is that students at Portland State University are not your typical college students. The median age of a college senior at Portland State University is 29 years old. The student body of Portland State University is 52% juniors and seniors. These students largely come in as transfer students from community colleges and are more often adult learners. 25% of the student population is a graduate student population with the professional programs at the university, and 22% are freshmen and sophomores. Our hope in this project to use badging for information literacy skills in the classes was that students would move beyond the viewpoint represented here on the screen. We hoped that badges would help students move past just a task list or a checklist as part of their education. And we didn't find that it did that for us. So the final quote, I think, is the most succinct. And this isn't necessarily negative. This is just kind of like meh. But the student said, yeah, it's fine, okay, whatever, but I'm not sure I'm going to use them in the future. So I do want to talk a little bit about neoliberalism, or what I see as a commodification of education, or education for sale. When I start thinking about this, I immediately think about Lloyd Dobler in Say Anything. If you are familiar with the movie, John Cusack and his girlfriend in high school are in love, and Lloyd Dobler meets this girl's father, and the father asks Lloyd Dobler what he might do in the future, and his quote is on the screen. And for me, that's just immediately what I think of. Maybe it speaks more to my worldview in terms of popular culture than anything else. But I have seen, particularly at my university, that the way students are approaching their education, and then the way my university has to approach education, is in this capitalist marketplace. And I find it quite disturbing. It's where students and skills become a commodity. Students in seats at universities are dollar signs. We're increasingly pressed to have high student credit hours in our departments, or classes will get cut, or programs will get cut. So all of this makes me really bristle. Education seems to be more and more for sale. But I've always been an idealist about education and see education as a public good. So when I weighed kind of the things that I think about in terms of education as a public good versus this kind of capitalist marketplace that I see, education as a public good would be to create a democratic citizenry to engage in our society. There's an idea expressed by Lisa Wheelahan in many of her writings based on Berensonian analysis a form of esoteric knowledge exists. And esoteric knowledge is the kind of knowledge that you didn't know was even possible until you've reached this threshold, so you don't know what's knowable. And that certain kinds of competency-based education can disallow students from gaining esoteric knowledge. So in that sense, she argues that competency-based education could serve to further oppress from elevating from one social class to another. And then the idea of education as a practice of freedom and educators having quite a lot of power in the classroom, particularly coming from our feminist scholar and writer bell hooks. On the other side, when I look at this commodification, you have competency and skill-based instruction, and then this idea of kind of a capitalistic take on education. Now, I think one of the problems for me is that the balance between the two, I saw getting I felt like this kind of neoliberal or capitalist thing with badges was becoming the elephant, right? So that was the thing that was taking up more of the time than working with this education as a public good. And I think some of this problem comes from my own academic elite experience as a person, as a human being. I was raised by two academics, grew up in the halls of university buildings, having parents both with PhDs. I also attended an elite private liberal arts college as a traditional student and went through in 4 years and took only a few years off before going to graduate school. So I think my world experience and worldview has enabled me to be very privileged in the way that I think of education as only for the public good. And I think that's also a danger for my thinking in terms of being a little paternalistic in terms of what students need to be learning. Students at Portland State, many of them are homeless. Many of them are using social services like food stamps and other things to get by while they're getting a college education. So all of these things have led me to question badges and how I use them, and then if I were to use them in the future, I wouldn't do it unless there are some things that I could come to terms with. And I have those questions here on this slide. I think one of the things that we struggle with as the librarians is how we might be able to engage students and define what they need from their education. And particularly when librarians are mostly teaching one-shot classes, how do we integrate that kind of conversation in a one-shot? And if you only have 50 minutes, it's almost impossible. And what would the appropriate balance be between this idealism of education as a public good and students who really need to get a job and feed their families? And something I forgot to mention a few weeks ago, the New York Times ran a special on education, and there's one particular article, which is in my references list, talking about blue-collar jobs and the need for a college degree to work in factories for those good blue-collar jobs. And then this kind of social ideal in the United States where having a college degree is like the thing that needs to be done, whereas in other countries there are other types of technical training that one could go through to participate in our economy. And then I think the last two questions are really thinking critically about badges. How can we use them and not have that elephant be on that image, be the neoliberalism? How could we use badges to ameliorate power structures that might be in the classroom or create community and create a practice of freedom, as Bell Hooks would like to do in her classrooms? And then how could we incorporate critical thinking about badges while we're using them? So these are the questions that are framing for me for badges before I were to move forward, if I were to use them again. And until I can do that, that's when my answer to the question of to badge or not to badge is never again. But with that caveat, not until I can answer these questions and do that successfully. So with that, I will stop for questions and show you my slide of readings.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry. This is Emily Rimland, and there's two questions that were asked during the presentation that I can ask, and if other people want to put them into the chat, we can get through them that way. But the first one was, aren't badges supposed to be a form of alternative certification? Many are useful outside the usual channels of instruction. Mainly useful outside the usual channels of instruction.
Well, I mean, I don't think that the badges are one thing. I think they could be used in many ways. In the way that I have experience using them was to hopefully surface for students the information literacy skills they were learning with embedded library instruction in a class. I think maybe it would be helpful if I described some of the assignments that we did. I'm going to go back to the slide with the badges we had on them. These badges were our core curriculum. And once students achieved all of these badges, they got the info analyzer badge with the little squiggly outline. Students were doing course assignments that led to badges. So badges weren't like this extra library thing. It was, for example, in social gerontology, students had to choose a nursing home in which they would feel comfortable placing a loved one, and using the websites of these nursing homes, the Web Ninja badge, evaluate the information they were getting there, and then write a paper reflecting on what they found online and what they found useful evaluating these nursing home commercial websites, and then also some data offered by a Medicare website. So that's how we used it. So you're asking about the co-curricular alternative certification, sort of skills that students don't necessarily learn in a traditional classroom. And they could certainly be used for that as well, but that's not my experience of using them in that way.
Okay, great. Then I had another one from Brenda, kind of in a similar vein. So the professions these students are going into, what micro-credentialing is already in place? That may have been a good way to introduce the concept of micro-credentials and how they hold weight in many industries.
Exactly, and that's, thank you for pointing that out, Brenda. That's why we tried to do this in public health classes. One of the major of health studies at Portland State University, a lot of the students are going to be certified health educators. So there is a certification test that these students will end up taking if they want to be a certified health educator. And so that's why we kind of felt like maybe these 3 classes in community health or public health would be good ones to use. It was used in the intro breadth class, it was used in social gerontology, and it was also used in a course called community nutrition. And so the public health itself is a profession that does rely on some certifications. Students still did not see a path from these micro-credentials to credentialing in the future as professionals. Even though in public health, I think they changed the accrediting agency for education changed its name, but the Associated Schools and Programs of Public Health does call out information literacy in one of the core domains of knowledge for undergraduate students. So there is the public health education organizations identify information literacy as important. There are credentials needed for students to continue after a bachelor's degree to work in health education and other fields, but there was still a disconnect with that.
Great, and I think we have time for one more. Jennifer, I think, is just trying to clarify pieces of this. She said they did an assignment for the class and then they had to do something with the badges on top, or were the assignments embedded with the badging system itself?
Well, let's take the system out of this. Badges were awarded for successful completion of the assignments. So a student who evaluated a website about a nursing home using some of the information from the Medicare site as well as the nursing home site and finished the paper, they got the Web Ninja badge. In a different class, students had to use an authentic assessment to get the Web Ninja badge, so the curriculum wasn't the same over the 3 classes. In the intro class for Public Health Hour, Community Hour Health, students had to use the CRAP test in an authentic assessment to assess 2 different websites, and that quiz was administered through D2L. The badging system alone didn't work with D2L, so we were trying to do this hack using the technology, but their assignment was to do this quiz in D2L, and after they successfully did that and watched videos about the CRAP test, learned about it with me in class, and then completed that authentic assessment, they were awarded a badge, and that was an assignment for class.
Great. I think that's just in the interest of time. I think that's all the questions we'll take for now. But thank you, everybody, for submitting them, and I will continue to moderate them for Tori's portion of the presentation. Michael, are you going to introduce Tori?
So we're going to move on now to Tori Race, who is the online learning librarian at Penn State University. I think, Tori, you're set to go.
Yep, I am ready to go. If you can't hear me for some reason, just let me know in the chat, but it was good when we did the audio test. So I'm just going to give a brief overview of kind of how my 15 minutes is going to go. A lot of this is written in response to Emily's piece, and I want to thank Emily for writing that piece because it allowed me to think about badging in a way that I haven't really thought about it since there was a piece written in 2013 by Rue Guinness in a conference proceeding titled Talkative Objects in Need of Reinterpretation, Rethinking Digital Badges in Education. That piece I constantly still refer back to when I'm talking about badges or micro-credentials with other people. And I think that Emily's piece has provoked a similar thought and really critical reflection on my part on what it means to be using these badges within courses. So Rue Guinness, in his piece, really talks about badges there's been too much focus on badges as motivators, which Emily sort of referenced that idea, and external rewards. And really, how we should be thinking about badges is as being situatively effective as learning pathways or as routes between an activity system. So badges have, in his words, badges have tails and conditionalities, and students can really build their learning journey based on the badges they've earned to see where they can go next. It's really a visual map for them to build learning in out of the classroom or traditional non-credit instruction. So I think that as educators, and Emily referenced this as well, we all struggle with the balance between our own ontological, epistemological, and axiological beliefs and the realities of the system in which we work, right? So I struggle with that as well. For me personally, I do a lot of qualitative interpretive work, and then when you go to look for funding agencies, that's not as heavily rewarded. It's more quantitative, objectivist, positivist type of research. So everyone struggles with that as an educator and then where their education came from. For me, much of the struggle can be explained when looking at a piece by Berquist, The 4 Cultures of the Academy. And the 4 cultures of the academy are collegial, managerial, developmental, and negotiating. Berquist claims that everyone aligns more closely with one of these cultures than another, but that there are elements of each in all of the cultures. And Emily could disagree with me if she's familiar with this, but her perspective to me really resonated with the collegial culture. It's within this culture that the academic enterprise should advance knowledge, esoteric knowledge, and develop critical qualities in the students that it teaches. Her struggles with badges seem to remind me of a clash with the managerial culture of education. Within that frame, it's focused on specific goals in which learning objectives are clearly measured, learning outcomes are clearly labeled, and specific skills can be tracked for students and be clearly measured. So at this point, I would like to pose just a question for you all to think about as I continue to give my 15 minutes. Are the badges in and of themselves negative, or perhaps are they maybe not the right credential for teaching critical thinking in the way that Emily was thinking of it? So, sorry, I'm a slide behind. So I agree that neoliberalism in higher education alters the public good intent of education. I would argue, are grades and transcripts any less of a factor in reinforcing the traditional power structures and hierarchies? Where is this pressure coming from? Are we the ones driving that change, or are we just responding to the change in our society? Colleges feel fierce pressure to survive. Degrees and majors typically thought of as liberal arts or humanities are struggling. When marketing departments, for example, the Penn State Real Campus Marketing Department, does a thorough market analysis of any degree that's proposed to go online, and will not put online degrees that are not seen as having the potential to generate income, because it's a lot of money to put the degree online, and so they want it to go to courses where students are going to sign up for them. So when marketing departments analyze these programs, many of the programs thought to contribute to liberal arts or critical thinking are not approved because there's just not a market for them with adult learners who need concrete skills to advance their degree. We need to drive students to come to our universities, and on college tours, students and parents are very concerned about the ability to find jobs after graduation. I remember that going on tours with my parents. So the cost of college is exorbitant, and it keeps going up, as can be seen in this graphic that I have here. And while educating for liberal arts and critical thinking are ideals that colleges should hold highly, I do not think that giving a credential that gives students an edge in their resume and experience is a bad thing. While people will generally subscribe to one ideal over the other, in my mind, they don't have to be mutually exclusive. So this image here is an image from Mozilla. It's a very common image used when talking about digital badges. It was one of the first images. And so I'm hoping everyone's a little bit familiar with badging, but this image really shows that there's metadata and there's an open badging standard to increase the quality of digital badges. So the design of badges could always be faulty in terms of contributing to like participation badges or really external motivators, but the standard is there to create really high quality badges. So I think the badges, and this is a far-reaching goal, but I think that badges have the potential to reduce the cost of education by increasing focus on prior learning assessment and breaking down student skills on a granular level. So I work with students who come in with a ton of transfer credits and a ton of prior learning assessments, but they're not necessarily able to translate them into what's valid knowledge in college. I didn't mean to make that rhyme, but for example, I have a colleague who's teaching a class right now where students develop a portfolio, and by the end of the class, they have a portfolio that they can submit for a prior learning assessment. They have all of this experience from their job, and they're just not sure how to translate it into college. And so I think badges, I actually view them as a way to break through the power structure of higher education. So many at-risk students feel overwhelmed when starting college, particularly those in the online environment. We have found, and this is work that I've done with Emily Rimland with new freshmen of the traditional age, that starting students off by earning badges rather than throwing them into the deep end of the learning management system and saying swim, scaffolds them to understanding what levels of work are acceptable in college. And those were findings that we got from doing badges with one of those classes that we did not think of, Emily Rimland and myself did not think of prior to doing that work. So students appreciated the step-by-step direction of their learning, particularly the first-year students. I don't think this means that critical thinking is neglected in badges. So as Dave Moffat states in his blog post that really analyzes deeply the Clark-Kozma media debate of the 1980s and 90s, if you're familiar with that, in instructional design. Design is the key to influence the learner. Both medium and method are important elements in the design. To reach today's learner, we must include technology, or the learner will seek it out alone. So I believe that our library of digital badges here at Penn State promote critical thinking skills and help to make understanding how to engage in critical thinking skills explicit to students. And making that engagement and modeling explicit to students is stressed in the learning sciences literature over and over again, particularly by Kratchik and Blumenfeld. This picture, as I'm talking, if you want to understand what it does, it shows the multiple learning pathways that students have as they are earning badges at Penn State. So when referencing power structures, I think that the outcome-based education movement theoretically, and this isn't necessarily how it's going to play out, but theoretically puts the power in the hands of students. Rather than being dependent on the university for grades and credits and seat time and traditional ways of thinking, they can build their own learning pathways. This is a powerful concept and not a reinforcement of neoliberal views. It gives students the power to tell universities to deliver on the value of their product, or they will get a similar education elsewhere. And also, I just want to say that it's natural, I think, for new technologies and innovations such as badges to be scrutinized more critically than what they are replacing when thinking about it as a disruptive innovation, as Christian tend to say. So I'm going to briefly talk about the studies that we've done. So in the studies that we have done, student responses are much more thoughtful and reflective in the badging system than they are in the learning management system. I have no idea why this is, but it was a really surprising finding to me and really interesting. And this happens repeatedly. I've used badges in a variety of classes, in a variety of levels. This happens with any class, any major. Students really put a lot of time, it's clear they put a lot of time into the badges. Is this because in the badging system I'm able to provide personalized feedback at each step? At Penn State we have our own badging system. Is that why? I'm not sure. I don't know. It's something that is on the top of my research list. But a mastery-based learning environment, which digital badges are, can actually promote critical thinking because failure is no longer the primary concern. So just as video games encourage an environment of ill-structured problem solving, student agency, and persistence, I think putting learning in the hands of the learner in a badging environment engages students with higher education in a different way. So one way I think to kind of circumvent or look at it from an alternative perspective is to actually let the students design their own badges and do participatory design. So Emily Ford notes in her study, that the students communicated more when they did the curriculum with the badges than when they did not. I think that some of the takeaways that I had immediately were the way that that article was, that opinion piece was written, to me struck me as instructionist-centered, to assume that the students are going to aspire to your goals. And this thought process could largely be avoided by having students co-design. And so just because they did not aspire to your goals or meet your standards doesn't mean they're not learning or they have a deficit of learning. So we can't tell what a student is going to learn based on what we created. However, I think that badges help to make our thought process explicit, help to model what we're thinking as experts for students, and then ground the abstract thought of students, such as ourselves, into bricolage for the students. And so badges, I think also this is an advantage and disadvantage. They can capture informal learning that was not previously captured, and this is really important with the increased focus on engaged scholarship. They provide a really nice way of capturing those engaged scholarship moments that could not previously be captured. So another question to consider is if students act any differently without the badges. Grades and transcripts don't inherently promote critical thinking. Part of the problem, I think, with critical thinking is that it's ambiguous and hard to define. However, the design of the badges, I think, can spur both critical thinking and has the potential to change some of the power structures in education. So I'm just going to give a real quick example of what I mean by that. I took a design studio class. When I took it, there were not badges in the class. The instructor told us what to do, told us what we had to learn, and it was very much HTML, CSS, databases, those sorts of concepts. The year after I was there, he went to students and asked them to design the class, and the result was a series of badges built like a pathway in which students could pick the areas they wanted to focus on. The instructor still had his learning objectives and criteria for grading students, but now there was more power in the hands of the students to build their own flexible learning pathways. So I think that viewing badges as a commodity is one perspective. However, from a student perspective, they provide a learning pathway and allows visualization of how and what they have learned. Captures learning that previously went unrecognized. I saw that somebody can barely hear me. It was okay in our sound check earlier, so I'm not sure. Hopefully other people can hear me okay. So I think they do formalize informal learning, but they also give students talkative objects to talk through. So on this slide, I just include some best practices for digital badges. And so these are 6 practices that I've kind of come up with as I've used the badges in different classes. So design them with multiple opportunities for failure, engage in user design, do not impose our goals on the students, make them voluntary, and then really think about the design and how we're designing and integrating the badges. So this is an example of our some of our badges at Penn State that we've built them into this hierarchy of foundational learning outcomes that can be grouped together, and finally students can earn the Uber badge. Well, we call this the Uber badge. So just to contextualize this briefly, and this will wrap up kind of my rant here, is that our situation at Penn State, information literacy is a co-curriculum learning opportunity. The vast majority of students will not take a library studies class. The vast majority of library instruction received is with one-shots or in an online environment, asynchronous modules that do not engage in personalized feedback. If badges are not used, how do we respond to the following questions? So if we lose the learning pathway that the badges provide, how do we ensure that co-curricular opportunities are made available and accessible? And how can we better measure the importance to students of having a digital record of their self-directed engagement, and what amount of importance will support the university, will justify the university supporting it? So in summary, I just want to wrap up here so it's time for Q&A. In summary, the media debate of the 1980s is settled between Clark and Cosma. Design is the most important factor in student learning, and now we must evaluate how technology impacts teaching, because it is the design that truly matters. And that is the end of my slide, and I can share my references afterwards, but we can do a few minutes for the Q&A. Emily and Michael, if that's okay.
Yeah, thanks, Tori. I had one thing out of the chat, not necessarily a question, maybe more of a comment, but maybe you want to respond to it. It says to design their own badges requires actually reading the syllabus, something that many students here do not do, and our syllabi have learning outcomes laid out. So what do you think about that?
So there's only so much we can do for students, but I think if you change the model and say like, hey, you're responsible for designing some of what you want to see in your learning outcomes, you increase engagement with students with the syllabus. I know that's how it changed in that class that I took. It went from being, oh, the instructor's making me read this to, oh, I actually have some power in what I'm doing here.
I think my microphone was muted, so I apologize for that. So there was a question earlier about how do you use badging for assessment purposes?
That question actually was written when Emily was talking, so she can jump in as well. But the way that I use them for assessment purposes is in the badging system, students either get it or they don't. And then it generates PDFs that I send along to the instructor in the classes that I'm embedded in. And then it's just, right now, that's how it works. And then it's added to Canvas, which is our learning management system. hopefully soon there will be LTI integration so they can just speak to each other and it can be added to the gradebook in that way.
Great, and then Christina asked, do you have plans to expand or revise your badging system?
Yeah, that's a good question, isn't it? So within the library, we have plans to expand the badges. It started as 10 information literacy badges. Now we've added an orientation level of badges that introduce students to things like Ask a Librarian, Line Search, which is our discovery layer in the library, library guides, how our library resources are in Canvas, those sorts of things. And then we also are looking to further develop badges within teaching about citation managers and those sorts of things that we used to offer classes for, but the classes got really low turnout, so kind of turning it into an asynchronous type of anytime, anywhere instruction. And then the badging system as a whole, I don't have a whole lot to say over that. If you're interested in looking at the badging system, I'll type in the chat box here what the website is. Anyone can log in with Google or Twitter or Facebook on it, so you don't have to be a Penn State member. But yes, there are development plans within the system. For example, automatic quizzing was just put in, which has helped to cut down on some of the evaluation times for some simpler steps. Little updates like that have been happening, but I'm not the developer of the system, so I don't have as much say over that. But yes, it's growing. Yeah, the instructor is added to the grade, Mary. In the one class I have, it's 20% of the grade because it's an orientation level class, and the other one is 6%.
There's one more that just came in from Rebecca. She may want to take that one, and then I think Cynthia might jump in with some of the discussion questions she had. The question is, how do you establish buy-in with faculty on badging?
Yes, that's a good question. So I don't work with people who have no interest in doing it. So there are faculty who are excited about it and willing to engage in it, and there are programs that are micro-credentialing their whole programs, and so that's an easy target, right? Because you know there's people already thinking about transitioning learning outcomes and making them more granular. So that's really how it starts, right? Find the champion within that department instead of trying to convince the whole department, and then they say like, hey, this is really helping my students and improving my student work. So I administer a survey to students, to the instructor after they earn their orientation level students, and he had 100% strongly agree that the badges added value to the class, they improved the sources that students use in the class, he enjoyed having them. And so then when you find a champion like that, they can just naturally speak from their experience, and then other people will become more on board.
Thank you so much, Emily Ford and Tori Race, for providing some great context for our discussion. We're going to spend about the last 10 minutes opening up for a general discussion, and I want to just welcome in Cynthia, who's going to lead that effort.
Great, and thank you, Michael, and hopefully everyone can hear me. I'm going to go ahead and type our discussion questions in the chat box, and we can take the discussion in whatever direction the group would like to go. So here comes question number 1. What is the role of badges as teaching/learning and assessment tools? And we've already been talking about that quite a bit. So if anyone has any other thoughts or wants to share anything, and I'll go ahead and move on to questions 2 and 3 as well.
I'm going to put that Regina citation in the chat box. I just saw somebody ask for that.
Corey, I did put it there already.
And thanks, Jennifer. Yes, definitely tracking tools as well, recording what work has been done. So what does everyone think? What's the role of some of these? And I'm trying to keep track of the chat. Thank you, Kim. Yes, so engage students with a curriculum, allow them to share often unrecognized learning with others. And I think that's kind of the biggest thing is sort of it's this sort of kind of less formal type of learning. At least that's been sort of some of the experiences that I've had as well. So tracking student completion. And definitely also relating to learning outcomes. Exactly. Less formalized pathways. Okay, great. And thank you, Emily. Okay, so you're really focusing more on the activities and not so much the badges themselves. So flipped classroom models, okay. Can anybody talk a little bit more about how you're actually using it as within a flipped classroom model? That's actually a perfect segue into the next question, which is what's the role of badges within instruction programs? Okay, so some students, Chris, I see they're completing the activities before they come into class, and that's kind of how you know that they've done some of those pre-work. Okay. Sorry, I'm trying to keep track with the chat. Okay, ticket to class, or you could use ticket out of class and class. Okay. So definitely the endorsement is also, right, what are they going to do with these badges? And that's something that we have found here at Oklahoma State with our program, with our out-of-classroom learning program. The minute it was endorsed by the graduate college for graduate students, it took on a completely different meaning for students than had we just offered them directly through the library. And I've had experiences with kind of both of those. So definitely endorsement is a huge issue. So you can use them as pre-assessment. Oh, great, Mary. Very similar to ours. I guess maybe as the pre-assessment, in this case, it might be more of the tracking, perhaps, sort of knowing if a student has completed a certain activity. I don't know. I don't want to speak for other folks, but I think that's kind of how I'm reading it. And sort of the final question, the final discussion point is, again, sharing examples. Badges for faculty, okay. And somebody previously in the discussion had questions about badging for student employees. So there's kind of different types, obviously different types of badging purposes as well. Definitely. So it's really, okay, so I'm looking at kind of some of these comments, personalized learning, we're using them in conjunction with that. The discussion is really, really wonderful. That's actually really interesting, using badges for research data management activities. And thank you, Emily, for sharing information about your project as well. So I think, at least in my mind, it really just depends on how the badges are designed, on what their purpose is, how they're deployed, who's endorsing them, and sort of how students might be able to utilize them, whether in a more formal instructional setting or not. And we'll definitely try to capture the stream of the conversation that's going on and summarize it so that everyone can see kind of what were the different issues that were discussed as well.
I see that we're heading towards 2 p.m. in the east, 1 p.m. in the center part of the country, and I know that we were scheduled here from 1 to 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, my time. But I want to thank everybody for joining us today. This conversation has been great. I want to particularly thank Emily Ford and Tori Race for their excellent presentations. to offer some context for our discussion today. I want to encourage everybody here that joined us today, if you are not a member of the Digital Badges Interest Group, to please consider joining us. And we look forward to having more opportunities in the near future to engage in these types of conversations. Once we end today, we will be able to send out the recording of this session so everybody will have access to it. And that will go through the Digital Badges Interest Group listserv. And you can find more information about that at the ACRL website. And we'll also post that to the ACRL Digital Badges Interest Group LibGuide that's available. And that information will be communicated in an email to the listserv as well. So once again, thank you everybody for joining us. It was a great conversation, a great chat, and I see there's a question, will the chat be provided? Yes, we do make every effort to capture the chat and provide that as well with the recording so that we're able to capture this great discussion, the great resources that were shared from everybody, so we can continue to move forward with digital badges and looking for new and innovative ways to use them to ensure that students, faculty, staff, everybody's getting the most out of these resources. So thank you again. Thank you so much for joining us.